Hey everybody, I am Nate Swick. Welcome to once more to our weekly talk about. We're going to talk about bird identification. We're going to talk about birding, and let's welcome once more Greg. How are you doing? Still hanging in there, even though we're still isolating.
I am in my secure bunker, which is actually my normal state of being,
Yeah,
having this job.
yeah,
But yeah, I am isolating.
yeah. One of the good things about being with the ABA is that we are actually pretty well versed in working from home. We're spread all across the continent. We've got the headquarters in Delaware, but you're in Chicago. I'm in North Carolina. John's up in Michigan. We got people all over the place. We got people all the way out in California as well. So if you got any questions about birds, birding, bird ID, bird anything sort of related to birding, please let us know in the comments. We are keeping an eye. We're actually live streaming on Facebook in the What's This Bird group. We are on YouTube. We have a YouTube channel. You can check us out there. And we are also on Twitter at ABA, which you should, follow anyway if that's something you enjoy. We do a lot of cool stuff on those, and we're
We
trying to
do.
do more as we are all stuck here at home for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, so even though this is, just in the I shouldn't say just because you just said it's all over the place on Twitter, YouTube, and we're kind of populating it around Facebook. We don't have to just talk about bird identification here. That's kind of one of the most frequent types of question we get. But if you got questions about anything relating to birds, just feel free to drop it in the comments, and
Absolutely.
we'll see if we can come up with some good lies or
We'll make it seem like that we know what we're talking about. We're pretty good at that. So.
oh, we excel at that.
But what I do have are, as usual, a few images from photos from questions that people have asked in the Facebook "What's This Bird" group for the last couple days. I just kind of perused before we got on here. And grabbed a few interesting images that show some interesting ID questions that can be answered. Some birds that a lot of people are seeing right now that maybe they want some answers to. And I can go ahead and throw that up right now if you want, Greg.
Sure.
Suan C. Pile says hello on Facebook. Hey, Suan, how are you doing?
Hello.
Hope you enjoy talking about birds for a little while here. So, Greg, I'm gonna put that first image up, and what we have here from Gove County, Kansas, is a photo that was taken today. That is how up to the minute we are here at
Yeah.
ABA Live. And this is a sparrow, kind of an interesting sparrow. A lot of sparrows moving. They're one of the first migrants that you see every spring. A lot of sparrows on the move a little bit before the warblers start moving. And this is a real classic one that a lot of people, at least in the eastern two-thirds of the continent, are going to be seeing right now. What do we have here, Greg?
Well, let's talk just a moment about what we see, and
Mm-hmm.
I think the first thing you notice is this bird's pink bill,
Absolutely.
and the second thing, and you might hear birders talk in terms like this, and it's once you get more familiar with feel, or jizz, as they say, it's you'll hear birders say things like it has an open, friendly face.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'll notice this bird has kind of just a plain face, and the little eye ring, it makes it look friendly, and it makes the face look kind of plain. And that look, coupled with the pink bill, and the little rusty cap, identifies it as a field sparrow. And some of the others, I wish we could quickly pop up a chipping sparrow, which is the
I
bird
have
that
one.
it's
Actually,
most.
hold on just a second.
Do you? Okay, it's the bird that it's
There you
most
go.
frequently um, confused with.
Mm-hmm.
You'll notice that the dark eye line gives the face and everything just a completely different look. It's got a more
Yeah.
serious, whatever look about it. But anyways, that's
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
a
and
field sparrow.
Yeah, and so field sparrow versus chipping sparrow is a real classic ID conundrum. They're both in the same genus, so Spizella, so they're going to have a similar shape, kind of chunky bodied, longer tailed than a lot of sparrows. But yeah, that dark eye line right there in the chipping sparrow, especially right now when they're looking really super sharp for breeding, they kind of look like gives them kind of a fierce, kind of an angry look, whereas field sparrows have, as Greg you said, that open
And
face, plain face, innocent.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, birders have all sorts of these little shorthand terms that we use to describe birds that sometimes we're not always very good about explaining exactly what those mean. Sometimes we can be a little jargony. Yeah.
Well, my favorite among them, and I use it every week, is describing sharp-shinned hawk as googly-eyed,
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
the adults.
Yeah.
And it's like people are like, what the heck does that mean? It's like, well, once you get a good look at
Yeah.
what they got these weird forward-facing googly eyes
Yeah.
that look just kind of funny.
Yeah, bemused or surprised is
Yeah,
terms I've used to describe sharp-shinned hawks the way they look.
yeah.
Yeah, and field sparrows away. So yeah, field sparrow. Definitely keep an eye on those. They have a really distinctive song as well. So if you're out driving through any farm fields or you live in an area where there are sort of pastures behind you, with kind of low scrubs, you may be hearing field sparrows right now. They have that kind of bouncing ball, accelerating that comes into a trill, real kind of nice and clear. And chipping
Yeah,
sparrows are singing right now as well.
yeah, Field Sparrow is a very sweet song, and
Mm-hmm.
if you don't know your bird songs very well, it's once you know it, it's in the eastern half of the country. It is a sound of summer anywhere there's a field,
Definitely.
or like open, just kind of open scrubby habitat.
Mm-hmm.
You'll hear that. You'll hear that everywhere.
Yeah,
And Yasuda is waving. Hi, Ann.
and chipping sparrow alternately is a bit more Catholic in its tendencies. They'll go to a lot of different kinds of habitats. I have them in my neighborhood. In fact, I was out walking around the neighborhood the other day, and I heard some chipping sparrows singing from an ornamental hedge. So they're inclined to find in a lot of you'll find them in different places than field sparrows. Field sparrows are a little more specific with what they like.
So here's a little aside on chipping sparrows. Um, One of the most sought after birds in the northern part of the eastern half of the country, so let's say north of the Mason-Dixon line,
Mm-hmm.
is worm-eating warbler.
Mm-hmm.
And worm-eating warbler sounds very much like chipping sparrow,
Yeah,
to the point where most of the time you cannot tell them
yeah,
apart.
yeah, that's true.
And it's one of those birds, when you hear birders talk about no herd onlys, they're talking about birds like worm-eating warbler,
Mm-hmm.
because the only way to truly verify a worm-eating warbler 100% is to see it.
Yeah,
And over the years, chipping sparrow you think of as being a bird of open habitat,
mm-hmm.
farmland, city, suburban. Worm-eating warbler has very specific nesting
Yeah. I
um,
was just gonna say.
requirements. It's a bird of deep forest. It lives in deep dark ravines, and it nests on the north slope of ravines, which are
Yeah,
always in the shade.
yeah,
So this is you couldn't get two more different habitats
it's true.
unless one lived out in the open ocean.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how many times I have been in deep dark ravines hunting down a worm-eating warbler that I'm certain is a worm-eating warbler, to have it be a chipping sparrow living in a deep dark ravine.
Wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the way it's going to be. Chipping sparrows are more
Yeah.
inclined to be in worm-eating warbler habitat. And, I can't imagine seeing a worm-eating warbler in chipping sparrow habitat, though. I don't know. In migration, anything can
In
happen.
migration, oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in migration, certainly.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose I've seen worm-eating warblers in sort of, as you say, I mean, they really like that dense stuff. They like rocky ravines. They like a little
Yep.
bit of rock outcrop and stuff. Um, in migration, I used to work at a science center in Durham, North Carolina, and I'd go on a walk around the outdoor part every morning when I got there, and I'd see worm-eating warblers in certain times of year in places where I wouldn't necessarily expect them, sort of adjacent to habitats. So I guess suppose there are sometimes in places where you can
Yeah.
get worm eatings and chippies in the same places. All right, well,
Cool. So,
the chipping sparrow was like way down the list, and I had to jump up, so I'm going to throw it up here. So there's Once again, there's field sparrow, nice big open plain innocent looking face, big white eye ring, chipping sparrow, a little more angry looking with that dark eye stripe, and the real nice bright chestnut top. These are both birds that
I I
you'd
hadn't
even
I
notice
hadn't
that.
scrolled I hadn't scrolled down that far. I didn't know you had chipping sparrow
Oh
queued
yeah,
up.
yeah. See, I've been scrolling back and forth, so we can follow along. All right, so we'll go to the next one, which is that Vireo from Diamond Springs, California. I know last week I threw one of the solitary Vireos at you, at
Yeah.
us. Someone threw it at us, and I just passed it along. And
Yeah.
that was an October bird. Those are a little more worn. Those are a little more difficult. But here, April 2nd, that's a much fresher bird. The location
Sure.
is a little less ambiguous for things like Plumbeus Vireo and Cassin's Vireo, Diamond Springs, California. This was a little more clear cut, I think.
Slam dunk
Slam
Cassins.
dunk
Move
Cassins.
along.
Yeah, so
That's
as we said last week, this is one of the three species that used to be called, if you have an older field guide, solitary Vireo. They are split. I don't know exactly when. I want to say it was in the 90s. And to three species, blue-headed in the east, Plumbeus Vireo in the interior west, and then Cassin's Vireo along the Pacific coast. California in the springtime, Cassin's Vireo, nice green. The light isn't super great in this photo, but you can get that green wash along the side. And now, because it's April, we know that that's a true color. That's
yeah,
not
and
where.
well, and one thing, one thing to mention about this bird, and this identification problem is this is where status and distribution really comes into play.
Absolutely.
Um, you know,
S&D.
the Cassin's Vireo is the expected Vireo that looks like this in California in April.
Mm-hmm.
And looking at this picture, just glancing at it, there is nothing at all that would make me think that it isn't. So, the blue and the green and the throat, the white throat, they're all
Mm-hmm.
kind of a little fuzzy. There's no sharp demarcation.
Yeah.
It's kind of blurry. And it doesn't in any way look as kind of sharp as even a female blue-headed vireo would look
Mm-hmm.
in springtime.
Yeah.
And so there's no reason to think that this isn't anything other than the expected species.
Absolutely. And those of you in
Yeah.
the eastern part of the continent, blue-headed vireos are one of those birds that will winter in much of the southeast part. So, they're uncommon, but regular winter. They're in those sort of moving flocks in the winter with chickadees and titmice and nuthatches and all that stuff. Where I live in North Carolina, but there is this brief period where all the ones from the south start coming up again, where you see quite a few blue-winged warblers, and it's right about now, late March, early April. They're an early migrant, and those of you in the further northern parts of the continent, so up the coast, are going to be seeing these birds more often in the coming days, I would say. I just think they're probably on your way. Not these Cassins, but blue-headed, which look very similar.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to throw a hawk at you. You always got to do the Cassin, the Coopers, and sharp-shinned hawk.
This is another slam dunk bird.
Another slam dunk. Now, I will say that the person who put this photo on What's This Bird, they did identify it correctly as a Cooper's hawk. You can see some nice Cooper's field marks here, the black cap, the pale nape, the kind of angry, mean, fierce expression, flat, exacerbated by that flat top of the head. But they wanted to know the sex, which is a more difficult thing, a more subtle thing. But
It is,
even
and
with this bird, I
saw
feel
that. I saw that, and I noticed a comment in that thread that said Cooper's hawks are not sexually dimorphic. They actually are.
Mm-hmm.
Size difference is sexual dimorphism. So it doesn't have to be plumage or color or anything like that. Actual structurally, they are different. And if they were the pair sitting next to one another, you would notice that the female is considerably larger.
Mm-hmm.
Very I should say very noticeably larger.
Yeah.
And if you look at study skins of Coopers and sharp-shinned hawks laid out from the smallest male Sharpie to the largest female Coopers,
Mm-hmm.
there's this middle section where there's a whole ton of overlap between the two species.
Yeah, and looking at this bird, I would not be surprised if I couldn't see the other features so well. This bird does feel like kind of a tweener bird. I do think this is a smaller male Coopers.
I
I mean, look at
agree.
those spindly little legs.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say
Mm-hmm.
is that, a sharp-shinned hawk, like a small sharp-shinned hawk, a male looks like its legs and feet, its toes are made out of twist ties, like you
Yeah,
would take off a bread bag.
yeah,
Whereas Cooper's hawk typically looks more like a pipe cleaner. They're much more robust.
yeah. Yeah. So we've got a few questions in the comments. I'm going to put the what's this bird
Sure.
photos on hold for a little bit, and we're going to go to some of the questions. I have an interesting one about birding in the age of COVID, and this is actually a discussion that I want to have for the podcast in the next episode of the podcast. So I don't want to spoil anything, but don't think there's a ton of overlap in the listenership here. But Andy Brown asks, he's from Columbus, Ohio. He discusses chasing rare birds in the time of coronavirus. He mentioned specifically a hooded oriole, Ohio State first hooded oriole, gorgeous
Yeah, I
bird,
saw that.
that showed up in Central Ohio. The homeowner did not want people coming by, but some people showed up at the property next door. Oh my goodness! The homeowner did allow some people to see it. Should we stop posting rare birds at this time? Oh, that's a tough one. I am of the belief that there are opportunities for us to bird during this period, provided that we take into account the appropriate stipulations about social distancing and all that. But man, rare birds are such a difficult thing. I definitely like to know about them, and I'm the sort of person that, I'm not going to necessarily chase something, but I do like knowing it's there. I kind of get a vicarious thrill from that. But if people are going to show up, that's obviously not safe. What do you think about that, Greg?
Well, not a whole lot to add to what you said. Car birding right now, if you can get out to a place where you can sit in your car and watch a lake or something like
Yeah,
that, that's totally fine.
yeah, I think
I
so.
think.
Yeah,
Um,
I would agree.
people do have to go outside for things like groceries and so on. And if but the bottom line is, you know, stay inside. I mean,
Yeah,
all the parks in Chicago are closed. Montrose Point, all the birding areas, the city park birding areas are all closed. I think most of the forest preserves are closed.
yeah,
Um, and uh, now as it's starting to warm up, it's gonna there's places that have access, that the police can't close everything down.
yeah,
So it's up to us to stay inside and bird our own yards. But in terms of rarities, boy,
yeah,
that is such a tough call because we want to know about it,
yeah.
and but at the same time, I mean, the homeowner says, "Hey, no, I don't want people here," and that's a good call for them.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
then
that's a good
people
call
start
generally,
finding
too.
ways to get around it, and
Yeah.
it's like, oh, then it turns into a big problem, and then, yeah, I just,
Yeah, it's almost like we should do the
I'm not
owl
an
thing.
authority, so I'm not going to say what you
Right.
should do.
Right. I mean, it's a tough call, and I definitely think we need to be thinking in terms of what is best for the community, not just the birding community, but like the community at large of like human beings that live in this country and are sort of having to deal with this. Um, Boy, I would not fault anyone if they wanted to kind of sit on a rarity though, and then let us know about it later. I can't, in the birding world, there's sort of a
Agreed.
connotation for that, like a negative connotation, people suppressing those sorts of things. But at this point at time,
These are not usual
these are not usual
times.
times. Yeah. Yeah, and I don't know that we really answered your question, Andy. It's a difficult thing, and yeah, he notes local metro parks and state parks are still open. That's the way it is here in North Carolina as well. Some of the very busy state parks are closed. Some of the ones sort of out in the sticks are still open. And if you walk on a trail that not a lot of people are going to be on, or even if you come across people infrequently, like you can pass each other without, getting in each other's way, I think that that's fine. And, I've talked about this with a lot of people. I do think there's sort of a mental health aspect to this. Like it feels good to get out and explore nature and
Absolutely.
bird like we have in the past. And like I think there's some of that that can be done, but man, we gotta be hyper
It
aware of what we're doing.
it definitely restores a sense of normalcy, which has all but flown out the window, and been tossed in the trash these last few weeks.
Yeah,
But rarities are different because, all right, just thinking
they are
about this
communal.
Oriole,
Yeah,
I can imagine, okay, there's 10 people standing in the yard next door, and they've
yeah,
separated themselves 6 feet apart, standing in the yard next door, but the bird flies into a tree and
and
you
they,
can only see it from one point of view,
yeah.
and everybody crowds together to get that one point of view. It's like, anyways, all right, let's move along.
Yeah, it's tough. All right, let's go back to some birds. Let's go back to some
Yeah.
identifying some birds right now. So this is a photo that came up. Um, is not one from April 2020. It's a hummingbird though, and hummingbirds are tough. And I do see your question about hummingbirds. Someone asked them, Rebecca, and I do want to get to this actually. Might be a good segue into it. But
Sure.
this is one from Eureka, California.
Yep.
So we're looking at maybe a half dozen possible species of hummingbirds in California in the middle of summer. But this is a classic one, even though it's a really nice photo, but it doesn't show a
Yeah.
ton of great identification features, except for the fact that it appears very large and green and gray, which is one hummingbird in particular, and that is Anna's hummingbird. We were talking about status and distribution, like knowing what is expected at a given place. And if you see a larger green and gray hummingbird, that's on the Pacific, anywhere on the Pacific coast. That's an Anna's
Yeah.
hummingbird.
And it's for a hummingbird, it's stout.
Yeah,
It's got a
really.
short, kind of a stout bill and a stout build.
Yeah,
And the other species that might be found in that area are not quite as hefty as this guy.
yeah.
And it is a guy.
For instance, Rufus versus Allen's hummingbird. We have a question from Rebecca Fagan Coulter. She says, "As a birding teacher in California, can you help me easily summarize for my students Rufus versus Allen?" Easily?
Ah, sure, catch it.
Yeah,
That's the
right.
first step. Catch
Yeah, she
it.
mentions, is there really a way to know other than flared tail feathers, which is so hard? Yeah, yeah, that's
Not
hard.
really. I mean, okay, adult males, yeah, you can tell.
Yeah.
But anything other than an adult male, no, you really need to see the flared tail feathers.
Yeah, and the thing about I don't have a ton of experience. I live in the East. My experience with Rufus hummingbirds are almost exclusively with wintering birds, which are more and more common in this part of the country every winter, and the very occasional Allen's hummingbird, which will show up. I think we have like maybe 3 records. I went to go chase it one a few years ago in Catawba County, and my sense, and this is based on very limited information, so whatever size grain of salt you need. Allen's feels skinnier, more slender. Rufus is like a very chunky hummingbird, but a lot of that is how they're moving around. That can be very
Yeah,
misleading. Yeah. Otherwise, yeah, flared tail, I guess, and knowing when the bird is being seen is also a really useful clue for Rufus versus Allen's. And a lot of parts, Allen's is your breeding one, and Rufus are just passing through in parts of
right.
California. Yeah. So another sort of non-answer answer for Rebecca. Thank you for asking. All right, so I got some more birds for you, including some hawks. I got a hawk for you. This one's from Oklahoma. This is from yesterday. Um, we love identifying hawks. We love identifying this hawk because it does seem to cause problems with a lot of different people. And this is one of the classic hawks across much of the continent. This is a
Yes.
red-shouldered hawk, but this is a little bit of a younger bird, not a full adult. It's not necessarily a full juvenile bird either. This is kind of a tweener.
Yep.
How would you go about
Which
aging
is
this thing? Do you have any idea?
it looks like it's getting some adult feathering on the breast.
Yeah.
So I would say possibly born. I don't know how long it takes red-shouldered hawks to get
Yeah, I
full
don't
adult
know either.
plumage.
I'd assume it takes more than
Um,
1 year, though.
yeah, so this might be a second year bird, third
Yeah.
calendar year. Um, But this bird is identified by the one thing that you can see pretty easily here is the bars on the secondary feathers. So those are the wing feathers that you can see most of in this picture. They have two or three dark bars, which are kind of vertical in this picture.
Yeah.
Um, the most similar species, broad-winged hawk, would not have those.
Oh, okay.
It has plain secondaries.
Yeah. Yeah, and I tell you, there's a lot of different plumages of red-shouldered hawks flying around right now. The ones that nest in my neighborhood just came off the nest like 2 days ago. So, like, the babies are already up and flying around with the parents. Fortunately, they make a ton of noise when they're together, so that's another pretty easy way to tell them apart. They're very loud hawks.
Yes, that is. You will all very, very often hear red-shouldered hawk before you will see it.
Yeah.
And broad-winged hawk is it's called you might not notice it. It's a very
Yeah. Yes.
high pitched double whistle, and they often sing from high in the air or call from high in the air.
Yeah.
And you hear this like weird whistle, and you have
It's
no
almost
idea
like a
what it
really
is.
strident peewee or something.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it might have a chipmunk or something.
Yeah.
You might not know what it is.
Yeah. Daniel McDermott has a question on Facebook. He asks on the hummingbird topic. Well, let's stick with it. It's a great time of
Sure.
year. A lot of hummingbirds coming back right now. Could you summarize likely uncommon rare hummingbirds that are seen in the east? How to tell them apart from ruby-throated? Well, let's see. If we're talking hummingbirds that are showing up in the winter, which tends to be when most vagrant hummingbirds are going to show up across the southeast or eastern part of the continent, there aren't going to be too many ruby-throateds. I mean, most of the ruby-throateds are pretty much gone by the end of October in most parts of the east. And by the time that the unusual birds start coming into November, there aren't going to be very many ruby-throateds, except along the immediate coast. At least speaking for North Carolina, I can tell you that there are still parts of the Outer Banks where they get like tons of overwintering ruby throats these days, which is pretty wild. But any sort of hummingbird that comes to a feeder in most parts of the east in November, between November and February, is going to be probably a vagrant from the west. And most of those, I would say close to 80% of them are going to be rufous hummingbirds, because that is a pretty common phenomenon these days.
Well, you know what? And while you were talking there, sorry if I got distracted there. I got a text message that I had to respond to.
Yes.
My wife asking if we wanted to make pizza or bread with the dough that we had.
Oh, man. Choices.
Exactly. Rufous hummingbird, I would say, is no longer a vagrant. I think that it's a bird that is an expected it's an expected migrant east of the Mississippi.
I put it in the field guide that I wrote for the Birds of the Carolinas. I mean, people see them often enough that they know.
They winter all along the Gulf Coast in Florida and along the East Coast, especially the Mid-Atlantic and Southeast Coast. And I think what's happened in the past 15 years is that the absolute surge in people buying hummingbird feeders has created a new food source for these birds that they have taken advantage of. And there's a whole new thing going on with rufous hummingbirds.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also that the vagrants, things like Anna's hummingbird, and so they're kind of episodic.
Yeah.
So like when Anna's, like, there was, I think it was 2011 or 2012, I think 6 or 8 states east of the Mississippi got their first record of Anna's hummingbird.
Yeah, and black-chinned is a very similar situation as well.
And before everybody had feeders up in October, November, December, nobody knew, because there were no flowers, and the birds either died or just kept going until they found some food of some kind. But now people are keeping feeders up into the cold months. These hummingbirds that would either die or move through, they're staying put, and they're using the feeders. So it's a really interesting situation with
and I can say in the at least where I am in the southeast, rufous by far the most common vagrant hummingbird that shows up in the winter. The next one is probably calliope, similar to rufous, very tiny though, like noticeably small. So we get calliope is somewhat regularly, then black-chinned. And then after that, it's a long list of ones and twos and not very many. But Rufus, Calliope, black-chin seem to be the most common three, and then Anna's less than that. And then after that, there's a whole boatload of hummingbirds that you could possibly see anywhere in the eastern part of the continent, especially in the southeast right now. Not right
And
now,
of
but
the
these days.
common ones in the winter, again, unless you get a male um, that's got some breeding plumage hanging on, um, those three, two, Calliope and black-chinned, are the most similar to ruby-throated, and
Yeah, black-chinned
they're the hardest to tell apart.
Yeah.
Um, and Illinois does not have a record of either. And it's not because the birds have been there, it's because people haven't been able to identify them when they show up.
Yeah. The great thing about hummingbirds is that you can bring them in close with a feeder, and you can take a photo with even your phone and get probably something that's diagnostic. And then you can post it in a group like What's This Bird, and we can help you identify it. But you don't have to do it by yourself. But and interestingly enough, a lot of records of vagrant hummingbirds, interesting records of vagrant hummingbirds, have been identified on groups like What's This Bird, or even on listservs or local state and provincial bird Facebook groups. It's actually been pretty phenomenal to see that happen.
Mm-hmm.
Tyson Smith says pizza.
Great. Oh yeah, we've already decided that. Thank you, and I agree.
Should put a poll up.
Yeah.
All right, so let's go back to another bird. This is a really fun one that I like. Very classic early spring ID issue.
Yeah,
this was a photo
give
taken.
this one away.
Yeah, I won't give it away. I'll let you handle this. This is from Northeast Alabama. This is a photo taken yesterday. This is a plumage that is not in a lot of field guides, and I think that's why it throws people off.
Yes, and it's hard, and it's a hard ID often. But what I'm going to say is, now I've said in the past that identifying birds from a single photograph can be very difficult, and oftentimes much more difficult than seeing the bird in life. This is the opposite. This is a slam dunk horned grebe.
Yeah.
And the reason is very particular and not esoteric. There's another word I'm looking for, but whatever. You'll notice on this picture that you can see a very small white tip on the bill.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah, you can.
That little white tip on the bill is diagnostic of horned grebe and differentiates it from eared grebe, which is the species it would be confused with in this plumage.
In this plumage, the plumages can look very similar just because they are all so ratty. I mean, this is a bird that's in the middle of molt. It's not quite winter plumage. It's not quite summer alternate plumage, both of which are pretty well distinctive. But when you start getting into these super splotchy black and white birds, frequently seen at a distance on a large lake, they can be pretty difficult. But yeah, that white tip on the bill, it's good, field mark.
If you can see that in the field or catch it in a photograph, that is slam dunk. There's no question.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, I know that I have been confused by these grebes. And where I live in the southeast, horned grebe that's the one. They're almost all horned grebes, and you need to prove that it's not. But yeah, horned grebe. I have another question that I meant to get to and that I just remembered from Faria Iqbal Puffin. I'm not sure. Puffin. Suggestions regarding IDing raptors and warblers. Those are two rather different groups of birds, but we can talk a little bit about it.
Raptors typically
what are you looking
big
for?
and eat things that they catch with
very
their
large,
feet.
Often flying around. Warblers are smaller.
Okay, sorry. We just go ahead.
So
I've been trapped in the house for 3 weeks.
They're obviously different, but there are some similar things that we were talking about when we go about identifying any group of birds, and that is shape that you see. That, I mean, those are classic ID things that you can look at for both groups of raptors and warblers. and what you will expect to see and when. So status and distribution, again, super great field mark for identifying just about anything. For at least taking it into consideration. So raptors, shape is the one thing that gets me first every time. How long the wings are in comparison to the body, how long the tail is in comparison to the body, the shape of the wings, how big the head is, how small the head is. These are all things that I'm sort of taking into account when I'm looking at a flying raptor or even a perched raptor. You know, the shape of the body, the length of the tail, the distance between the wingtips and the tail tip. These are all things that I'm sort of looking at no matter what kind of raptor I'm looking at when I'm identifying them. And once you can separate them into groups like buteo, accipiter, falcon, etc., then you can go into specific field marks.
Well, exactly. And if you're not familiar with or never seen an identification key, that's kind of what the mental process is. So an identification key is a book commonly used for things that are very hard to tell apart, like sedges and spiders. And it starts off, okay, does it have a round body? Then it's one of these, and you can discount all of that. Mm-hmm. Does it have big spiky hairs on its legs? Okay, you can discount all of these and move along.
Few warblers with big spiky hairs, but
yeah, I'm talking about spiders.
Oh yeah,
but in like a flying hawk, you're looking at those things, and if it has short paddle-like wings and a long tail, that immediately rules out a whole bunch of things. So now you've narrowed it down to 3, maybe 4 species. There's a couple of buteos that can look an awful lot like accipiters sometimes. But you've narrowed it down, and that's what you try to do. Is when you're looking at something, you want to narrow it down as quickly as you can to as few choices as possible.
Yeah, and it's the same with warblers. For warblers, it's things like body shape, length of tail, where you see it. You know, some warblers are going to be close to the ground. Some warblers are going to be almost exclusively way up in the top of the trees. So you're looking at ways to kind of pare down your choices. You look at a big field guide, you see a list of 45 warblers, and you're like, this is overwhelming. This is extremely difficult. But when you start paring down your choices by using things that aren't necessarily even on the bird, like, am I seeing it in a tree? Am I seeing it in a pine tree versus a deciduous tree? Am I seeing it near a marsh? You know, you're limiting your choices and making it easier for you to make those identifications, and that's a huge thing. And a lot of that is just experience, learning the ropes, learning what you expect to see at any given time or place. So get out and bird, and that's how you learn to do those things.
And of course, the caveat is that during migration, most of what you just said doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But learn. And this is one thing that I love about the Sibley Guide to Birds, and I think it's a book that every birder should have. But as you're talking, I'm flipping through the warblers, and general impression and shape. And if you look at some of the illustrations in Sibley, he captures this extremely well. So it's like you see this ovenbird that I'm showing you, and the two postures of ovenbird, that's how they look. And if you look in other field guides, sometimes they put all the warblers like with the same shape, so you focus on the color rather than the way it moves and the body shape and the way it presents itself. And another really good example here, it's subtle but it's really spot on, is notice the top female black-throated or black and white warbler, and the way it's kind of like weirdly angled on the branch, almost like a nuthatch.
Yeah,
and that is what they do. And then just one last example here is notice the Connecticut warbler at the top, how it's kind of walking along the ground like a thrush. And again, that's what they do. So that's a really good thing to keep in mind when you're looking at warblers, is not just what it looks like, but how it presents itself.
We have a question on Facebook from Frank Lehman that's sort of related to warblers, sort of related to what we're talking about. What North American warbler do you think has the most inappropriate or misleading common name?
Well, there's so many that have
I'm trying to think about it.
Like place names.
Yeah.
like Connecticut
Connecticut.
warbler.
Yeah.
Connecticut
That's a
warbler
good
is
spot.
really hard to see in Connecticut.
Yeah.
um, but let's see here. I've got the book. Let's look down the list here and
Yeah.
see
You've got a book in
what
front of you.
some
Look at that.
names are. I've always got this sitting here because I
Christian
can't remember.
Hagenlocker says Ovenbird, which, yeah,
Um,
I mean, yeah.
yeah, I understand why it's called ovenbird.
Yeah, but it's not something that birders are going to really see. I mean, I don't know that I've ever found
Right.
an ovenbird nest. Well, no. If you watch one long enough, you might be able to see it. I'm going to pull out my e-Sibley.
I mean, pine warbler is very well named.
That's a great name. That's a
That
perfect
is a
name.
great name. Yeah. Let's see here. Cerulean warbler is also very well named.
Orange crowned is
Um,
not great because you don't usually see the orange crown very well.
that's a good one. Yeah.
Any of the
Uh,
honorific names, because I don't like honorifics. Lucy's warbler,
yeah.
Virginia's warbler. What does that tell you?
I don't
Nothing.
know. Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah. I think it would have to be the honorific names or a few of the location
Prairie warbler.
names. Yeah, prairie warbler. That's a good one
It's
because
really more of like a scrubby pinelands
it's
glade warbler.
yeah. It's you do not see them in prairies. So
Yeah.
that's all right. Let's say prairie warbler
Prairie warbler. Prairie warbler.
gets the badge.
Cliff says Cliff Holly says Connecticut warbler. Olive warbler. Except olive warbler is not really a warbler, but it is
It's
a
not
terrible
a
name. Not
warbler,
olive, not a
and
warbler. Terrible
and
name.
it's not called olive warbler anymore. It's called ocotero,
Did that go
which
through?
I believe so.
Oh, I hadn't heard yet. No
I
spoilers.
thought it. I thought it did.
I hadn't heard.
Um,
That was
well,
potential.
if it hasn't been, it should be.
It should be. All right.
Because Ocotero means pine dweller, and
Yeah, or
that
pine
is,
runner or something. Yeah, yeah, it's cool.
yeah.
It's a colloquial name, a local name, where it's what it's called in like West Mexico, which is the core of its range. All right, so I got some more photos. This one I like. This is from Bakersfield, California. We've got two soaring birds here. We're talking about raptors. We're talking about what you're looking for when you're trying to identify raptors. This is a great one. This is like the cover of the old Sibley. This red-tailed hawk here with its long wings that are kind of the similar width all the way across, and the big old spread out tail. Red-tailed hawk. You can even see the hood. It's classic on red-tailed hawk. But that bird next to it, it's a
Now
common.
I can't see the photo, so I'm just going from memory.
Oh, this yeah.
But
It's a soaring northern common raven,
yes,
formerly northern raven, now common.
and
Corvus
you'll
corax.
see that it has the long wedge-shaped tail.
Yeah,
Um,
the diamond looks
and
like a diamond, almost like that.
it's got very long wings.
Mm-hmm.
And you can that makes an impression both soaring and perched. The bird just has very long wings.
I love this photo because it also you also see how freaking big ravens are. I mean, that is a massive perching bird.
Yeah,
It's as big as a
yeah,
red-tailed hawk, which is a big hawk.
yeah. And it's like when people claim they've seen extraliminal ravens, especially in the lower Midwest. It's like, oh, it was huge. It's like, no, if you saw a raven,
Yeah,
it's
it's one of
really
those things like
huge.
when you get a chance to see it, like it's like hairy versus downy woodpecker, right? So people always try and turn hairy woodpeckers into downy woodpeckers, but like when you see it, it's
Yeah,
obvious, right? That bill is
yeah,
big on a hairy woodpecker.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I just like this image, and I did get another one. Someone sent it to me on Twitter. I forget who. I'll find out who. I'll go to that
So we
thing
got a
here in
couple
just a second.
comments over here on my watch party.
Oh, right
Steve
on.
Zaner asks, "Do these commonly interact in flight?" I recall some good pictures I have like this. Yeah, I think all corvids will
Yeah.
get up and harass hawks if they get the opportunity. That's just kind of standard issue, and I mean everything from blue jays to ravens. If they've got the opportunity to cause trouble with a bird of prey, they'll take it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Anyway,
And
so I
Allie, we did
who sent
talk
me
about
this
the
photo?
wedge tail, but Allie Sheehy points out, talk about the wedge tail versus square tail.
I'll
And
go
yes, the
back.
raven has the long wedge-shaped tail versus the sort of more square or fan-shaped tail of a crow.
Yeah,
any
and
of our
I mean
birds.
the wings are not even close to the same shape. I mean, when you look at a raven perched, you see how long those wings are. I mean, those wings are going almost all the way to the tip of the tail. And
Right.
on a crow, fish, American, northwestern, whatever. I mean, those wings are going to be pretty short. They're not going to even get to the base of the tail a lot of times.
Yeah.
Ravens are just they're chonkers. They are
So
absolute units, as the kids say on the internet.
a little tangent, and which is interesting for people living in the Great Lakes, especially the Western Great Lakes. South of the boreal forest zone in Wisconsin and Michigan, ravens are unknown. And it doesn't make sense because in the East and in the West, and especially in the West, ravens are not really that habitat specific. And there's a lot of habitat around the Great Lakes that could support ravens, but for whatever reason just doesn't. And the records are outside of the boreal forest zone are very, 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 very few. It
Interestingly enough, they're moving
seems
into like urban areas in the southeast. It is a
well.
weird thing.
That's so. I mean, the number of raven records around, in Illinois, Indiana, or Lower Michigan, south of the pine forests, is single digits,
Mm-hmm.
and
I remember
now
this one.
it's but now it seems there's multiple reports that there may be a pair of ravens living in the Indiana Dunes National Park,
Wow, that's crazy.
which which is 30 miles from Chicago. They've been seen by multiple observers multiple times. Nobody's really like nailed down where they are, but that would be really something,
Yeah,
and that would
they nest in quarries out here.
yeah, and that would
Yeah.
be the place where they would set up shop. Would be around here. Would be the Indiana Dunes. It's a wonderful wild big wild area.
Yeah. Yeah, the let's see here. Yeah, Jenny Shockley says got lucky to see a raven up close in Colorado last year. Yeah, they're amazing and massive, absolutely massive. So I forget who sent this photo to me, and I've been looking for it all over the place. I think it was in What's This Bird on the official announcement that we were going to be going live, and I lost it. But I apologize to whoever sent this. But it's a cool goose that was photographed in Rouville, Quebec, just last week, and they ask if this is a hybrid and between Canada goose, obviously, with which it is associating, and greater white-fronted goose. And I'm always sort of very skeptical when I hear people talk about potential hybrids because they are actually not that common. But this guy, boy, it's really ticking a lot of hybrid boxes for me.
It looks like a hybrid of
Yeah,
something.
yeah,
Definitely white-fronted goose is involved.
yeah, and I think you can even see a little bit of the shadow of the white cheek on this bird,
Yeah,
and certainly
yeah,
the plain breast right there with the with a little bit of the speckle. You know, the colloquial name for greater white-fronted goose is speckle belly. It's one of the good
yep,
field marks when you see them flying over, and yeah, this has got a little bit of both. So I think this is definitely a hybrid. So you got it, you found a hybrid.
absolutely.
Yeah. Um, if anyone's got any questions, please let us know. Yeah, Tristan Jobin. Thank you, Tristan. Yeah, he mentioned it. I'm going to talk about that. So if you want to have any questions for us in the comments, please let us know. We're happy to take any birding questions here on Twitter, on YouTube, wherever you can see us watching. We've definitely got most people watching this on Facebook, though. So yeah, other than that, let's see. We've been doing this almost an hour now, Greg, which
Yeah,
is longer than usual. Spencer says the Chihuahuan ravens in southeast Colorado are awesome. They are awesome. I liked the name white-necked raven for that species better, but it's not for me. Other than that, Greg, I think we'll probably let's see. We don't have any other stuff to talk about. I don't think. Oh, Jenny Shockley has a question. She has a ton of warblers in the fall in her yard, but very few in the spring. What's the difference? There are more birds in the fall.
true,
Is one
true,
of the
and
differences.
and
Tim
the other
Tim
difference
Kovac says that.
is Birds, especially warblers, tend to linger more in the fall.
Yeah.
So you see them, in the springtime, they are rushing to get to their breeding habitat and get things underway as quickly as possible. And in the fall, they tend to take their time moving south, and especially the young birds tend to linger if they find a place they like to stay for a bit.
Yes. And there are, 2, 3 times as many birds in the fall as there are in the spring, as well, because in the spring, all you've got going north are the adults, and in the fall, everything coming south that are those adults, plus all the babies that they had that year are coming down at the same time. So there's just more birds to see.
Yep.
That's why I prefer fall to spring, to be honest. Oh, Frank. Yeah, sorry. I completely ignored your Empid question. I don't know if you want to have a look at that, Greg. There's an Empidonax flycatcher in the comments from Frank Lehman. Uh,
Well, I can't see it because I can't watch
oh,
Facebook
right.
at the same time
It's from Camp
that I'm
Sherman,
talking.
Oregon. It's a really nice photo. I don't know. It's got really long wings. That's what I'm looking at. But
I
other than
can't see it.
that, I don't know. What's a long-winged empid in the western part of the continent? I have no idea.
See, that's something I have to look up.
Yeah, me too. Sorry.
Let's see.
Spencer England says, should something like the Kirtland's warbler really be taken off the endangered species list? Who makes those decisions, and how can one really tell if it's rebounded all the way? That's a great question, and one that I don't necessarily know the answer to. I know that there's a long decision as to whether our species gets taken off. There are a lot of parties that are interested in removing those birds from the list. Some definitely for good reasons, some for more questionable reasons.
Yeah.
But something like Kirtland's is kind of a tough go-to, because that's probably a species that even pre-Columbian was never super common, just because its habitat was so specific. So, how do you know? How do you know when it's back? How do you even know what its population was a long time ago? It's a good question to ponder, and one that unfortunately I don't have any sort of real answer to.
Yeah, I mean, Kirtland's warbler. It's yeah, I have to agree with you because on the one hand, it's the protection um, and a lot of work that has allowed this bird to start spreading and either increasing its range or taking back range that it had lost. Um, and what would happen if the protection was taken away? It has
Right,
very
you have no idea.
it has a very specific requirement as far as its nesting habitat, um, and it's the kind of habitat that developers and pastoralists like to cut down. Jack pine groves,
Yeah, and it
it's like get rid of it.
requires and it requires a lot of management, which is the big problem with Kirtland's warbler,
Yeah,
is that it needs it to be very specific. Like if the jack pines get too tall, then the Kirtlands aren't going to use them. If they're too small, the Kirtlands aren't going to use them. And so it requires this very specific fire regiment. And so because people tend to suppress fires these days, the perhaps lightning fires that were natural in the pre-Columbian time, you have to burn it. You have to burn certain parts of the habitat to keep them in habitat, and
and
people
Brad,
are very
and, no, and brown-headed cowbirds,
yeah.
and brown-headed cowbirds. You have to remember um, are a man-made problem
Mm.
for birds like Kirtland's warblers and wood thrushes and birds that breed in habitats like that. Brownhead before opening up of the habitat and bringing in cattle, brown-headed cowbirds were not as prevalent as they are now,
Mm.
and species like wood thrushes have no natural way to defend themselves against them, whereas species that have evolved alongside of brown-headed cowbirds like yellow warblers, they do.
Yeah, the people who do manage them are heroes, absolutely. And
Yes.
Michigan Department of Natural Resources, or whatever that equivalent department is called, deserves a ton of credit for not only taking initiative to protect Kirtland's warblers, but also building all these sorts of public-private partnerships between organizations from the local level all the way up to the feds to protect that bird. Yeah, it's the labor of love in a lot of ways.
It is, and I mean,
We all benefit.
and it gets down to what do we as a society value? I mean, is it important? It's extremely important to me, and I think it's probably very important to most people listening here. But if you, I think if you like asked a number of people on the street whether they cared whether Kirtland's warbler went extinct or not,
Yeah, they'd be buying it by bulk with the toilet paper at Costco. That's how they know it. Juliet Berger has some context. She says Kirtlands are still endangered in Michigan, and MDNR has taken over management now that the feds have stopped. It's clear cut, chipped, and replanted in the places that would have been created with clearings with natural fire. Thank you, Juliet, for that insight.
Yep.
Good on MDNR for continuing to do that. Otherwise, we're coming up on an hour here, and so I think that we are probably going to say goodbye for the time being. But we'll be back next week, hopefully. I mean, we got nothing else to do. Two things to keep an eye out for. Next Wednesday at 8 o'clock, we're going to do the ABA Virtual Bird Club on the ABA's social media feed, so on Twitter, on YouTube, and on the ABA's main Facebook page. So please come and help out with that. The speaker.
Who do you got? Who do you got coming in?
Tessa Reinhardt. She's a researcher at the University of Pittsburgh. She does a lot of amazing stuff with avian acoustic monitoring and how they use that to make conservation decisions. She's fantastic. So I think it's going to be a really good talk. So that's Wednesday at 8.
Okay, this is you brought something on, and you brought avian acoustics. So with everybody staying home, even in a huge metropolitan area like where I live basically in the city of Chicago, and I live right by a major truck highway, and the noise and trains and everything, the noise is usually too loud to hear migrants going overhead. The last couple of nights, it's been so quiet that you can hear birds flying over at night that you couldn't hear before.
Wow,
and it's been really wonderful. It's been really wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah,
look for the bright side.
There's got to be a bright side, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So so that's next Wednesday at 8 o'clock. We'll send another reminder out to all the groups and whatnot, but it's definitely something that you'll want to be a part of if you're looking for something to do. If you're missing your regular bird clubs, we're trying to fill that niche. And Greg and I'll be back hopefully next week, barring any sort of whatevers. We'll be back around 1 o'clock.
Anywhere.
Right. Yeah. You're right. So we'll be back at around 1 o'clock next Friday. Save up your bird questions for then, and we'll be happy to answer them again. Otherwise, I'll see you on the ABA Slack channel, Greg, and I'll see all of you guys out on the internet. Thanks so much. Thanks for watching.
All right. See you. Bye.